Workhouses. What is a workhouse? A workhouse is a building where people who were poor or impoverished would go when they had no other home or job or possessions. So they would go to this workhouse and they would live and work there and eat there and pretty much stay there. In the workhouse, they would have jobs to do. That way they could stay there and live there and eat, and pretty much everything they would do in the workhouse would be able to keep them there. Many people who lived there were either orphan children, sick, disabled, unmarried mothers, and the elderly lived there too. Many people were scared to live there because of what they have heard, or cruelty, brutality, about the food, about the health conditions. There were so many conditions that have been talked about, or that people have heard about, that it made them scared to live there. They were also scared of what society would think of them. So what did the workhouse look like? The workhouse looked like, they looked like old buildings that were being refurbished to be used as a workhouse, or there were buildings that were built to be a workhouse specifically. The workhouses had communal dormitories. They had a dining room, a large kitchen, a bakery, a brewery, an infirmary, a laundry room, a sewing room, a school room or education room, a nursery, and a garden to grow vegetables in. All of these things that they had, like the large kitchen, the garden, the school room, the nursery, they were used to help the workhouse continue to be self-sufficient. And in order to be self-sufficient, they had to have all these things, all these rooms in this room for people to live in. Now, when they were working in the workhouse, they were either working, and when they were not working, they were sleeping. But they were always still expected to work when they were working. Their living quarters were quite cramped. They didn't really have much room when sleeping or just when living there. The men and the women and the children were all living in those dormitories, but separated. The conditions in the workhouse were not sanitary. They were not really good conditions. So, and including that, the diseases in the workhouses ran rampant too. In the workhouse, the families were separated, and they were separated in where they were working too, and whether it be the men or the women. The children under 7 were allowed to stay with their mothers, but if you were over 7, you had to go live in the children's dormitory, and you were not able to see your mother or your parents or your families until only one time a week, and that was it. That was all you got to see or spend time with your family. And the men had to share beds with other men because that's how cramped it was in there. Their quarters were that cramped. The women had to share quarters with other women, and the children had to even share beds with other children. It was so cramped in there, and you got to think there were always more people coming into the workhouse because the poor had no other. If they had already done everything they could to stay out of there, there was no other option for them. The workhouse was their last option. And when living in the workhouse, there were strict rules that you had to go by, and if you broke these rules, you got punished. And diseases just ran rampant in there too, because they didn't, as I said, they were all living in the same bed, cramped in the same beds. And early in one of the slides, I said that when I was talking about who all had lived there, like orphan children, disabled, unmarried mothers, and widows, there were also sick people that lived there. And when they were sick, the diseases were rampant because everyone would catch the sickness so quickly because of the cramped quarters. How did you qualify to be able to live and enter in a workhouse? So first of all, it was quite hard to qualify. And when you were going through the application process to get into the workhouse, you had to go through an interview process. And going in the interview process, if you were approved, you would receive a letter saying that you were approved, that you could go start and go into the workhouse. And if you were not approved, you would not receive a letter, and you would have to restart. If that was your last resort, then you have to restart the application process to try and get into the workhouse again, and until you did. And when you did receive the letter from during the interview process, you would go present the letter to the workhouse that that was closest to you, or your desired workhouse, and you present it within 6 days of receiving it. Again, if you missed the time window that you were supposed to give the letter in, like if you did it after the 6 days, then you had to go restart the interview process. How poor did you have to be to live in the workhouse? You had to be quite poor, and most times you were sometimes malnourished. And when going to the workhouse, you would try to do everything you could to stay out of the workhouse because of how the conditions were in the workhouse. And when going into the workhouse, it wasn't what they wanted to do. It was voluntary, yes, but it wasn't a choice that they wanted to make. It was normally their last resort, their last option. Normally they would sell all of their possessions that they owned before they would sell all of them before they would have to eventually go into the workhouse. That's how badly they did not want to live there. What the treatment of people living there? The treatment was normally not very good conditions. The food was not enough, or it was bland. It just wasn't good, and they had the same food every day. Like it was every day. And there were letters that were sent to the poor law. There was an article I read about called Workhouse Voices, and these letters were being sent to the Poor Law Commission that the new poor law in 1834, the Poor Law Commission was because of that law. And there were letters being sent to the Poor Law Commission from people in the workhouses in this article. And in this article, there were sample letters that I was able to see. And there were reports of cruelty and brutality. And the report that this is from an older elderly man, whose letter says that he was crushed to death, or almost crushed to death, by the master of the workhouse. And there was another letter saying an elderly man was forced to work when unable to. Like the workhouse knew that he could not or was unable to work, and they still did it to him anyways. The people in these workhouses didn't get a choice to work. If you lived in the workhouse, you had to work. That was how you got to stay there. You didn't have no other option, no choice. You couldn't really fight this unless you had to leave. And it was not the best treatment. And the freedom, no freedom. There was a letter from a woman that lived in a workhouse, and she said the letter was saying that she could not leave. Like she could not leave the workhouse at all. Like she had no freedom to leave. When other women or other people were able to, she was not able to. When joining the workhouse, there were certain uniforms or outfits that you would be having to wear. When first joining the workhouse, you would be disinfected, and your clothes and possessions would be put away in a certain part of the workhouse, or a store or whatever. And you were having to be given a new uniform and black boots after being disinfected. And before you were given a uniform to wear, you had to be treated for lice. So what they would do is you would be treated for lice, and there would be someone watching you. You wouldn't be able to do it by yourself because they wanted to make sure that all the lice, that you took the treatment and that all the lice you got rid of all the lice before you came into the workhouse. Because as I've said previously, diseases and everything else in the workhouse or illnesses ran very rampant, and they didn't want lice getting in there and going around because it would have made it a lot more unsanitary conditions. So the outfit that they had to wear is a uniform and black boots, and that's what they would wear day in and day out, because they didn't have whatever possessions or clothes that they had before were stowed away, so they couldn't wear that. So they were given these outfits, and they had to wear them every day. And the original idea for the workhouses was that they were going to make their own clothes. They were going to let the people make their own clothes when they came in. But then they decided that it would just be easier for everyone involved if they went ahead and had the clothes made in a factory, and they had the stuff, the outfits ready for them when they joined the workhouse. So the people who lived in the workhouse were treated in horrible conditions. The whole family had to live there. If a man came and he had to go move to a workhouse or enter a workhouse, if he had a family, his whole family went with him. They didn't get a choice. They followed him to the workhouse. If he decided to leave, they had to follow him back out. Like they went wherever the man went. And it was shameful for a man if he had to go bring his family in a workhouse, because then it was believed that he was not good enough, or that he was not able to take proper care of his family, and it made it shameful for him to. It made men feel shameful if they brought their families to the workhouse with them. It made them feel shame. Well, after joining the workhouse, were they ever allowed to leave? Yes, they were allowed to leave. They were given a 3-hour notice, or they had to give a 3-hour notice before they were able to properly leave. And as I said before, if a man left, then the whole family went with him. And when leaving, the family went with him. They didn't get a choice. They didn't get to say, no, I want to stay here. They went. The jobs in the workhouse. For men, jobs in the workhouse was grinding corn, stone breaking, chopping wood, or working in the woods. For women, it was sewing, weaving, scrubbing walls and floors and laundry, and just overall trying to keep it all clean and nice. These jobs were in the workhouse to keep them, or around the workhouse to keep it self-sufficient. That way the workhouse would not have to ask for funds from other places or the government or people. They would keep it self-sufficient. That way they could keep them open and for the poor. And the men, the men, women, and children that were living in the workhouse, when they were done sleeping or for the night, and they had to wake up and go to work, they didn't get a choice in working. When we have a job or a school and we say, no, I don't want to go in today, I'll call out or I'll not go to school, we can say, no, we don't want to. The people in this workhouse, they didn't have a choice. They had to go to school. They had to go work. If you didn't work, you were put out. They didn't have the same choices like we did.
Wait, no, pause it.